Hi guys, welcome to the 32nd episode of Tiger Heart Chats. This is a really special one. Basically, I just got back from Infocom, big AV conference run by Avixa out in Orlando. Had the time of my life. Honestly, if you get a chance to check out Avixa and check out the Infocom stuff online, it's really good. And try and look out for me as well, because I was basically like the MC for the Avixa Exchange Live. Also, guys, try and sign up to the Avixa Exchange. It's a really cool thing. It's kind of like a social media specific to the AV industry. And I found it really useful because I've started to connect with some new people. And one of those new people, she's someone I met out in Infocom, and straight away, like, her and I really developed a strong creative and friendship connection. She's got a really cool energy about her. She's super creative, super talented. I'm so happy to have her on the show. Please welcome to the stage, Rainy Fu.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rainy, and Sanj, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here on your podcast.
No, it's good. I mean, I was really enamored with your presentation that you did at Infocom, and it's really good to meet someone that works at Spotify. So those of you who don't know, Rainy runs a business called Rainygraphics. She's the founder of that company, but she's also an art director for Spotify as well. Rainy, there's going to be people who are listening to this podcast who don't know much about you. Give us a brief intro as to who you are and what you're about.
Yeah, sure. I'm Rainy Fu. Hi, everyone. And I'm from Singapore originally, and came over to the US when I was in my early 20s, like 21, I would say. So it came with a scholarship to study at Savannah College of Art and Design, which, if any one of you listening right now, is a really good motion graphics and visual effects, like major, I would say, globally, it's like a pretty recognized school. And so I crafted my way right now into this field of events and motion graphics and branding design for the events that I've been working on at Spotify. So to date, I have about 30 to 40 events that I've been working on before. But my background really comes from a very humble side of my family, because they are both, my mom and dad, they are both hawkers in Singapore, which are called like street food chefs, if you know about that, in Asia. So they come from a place where it's like super down to earth, and it's all about like working hard and like heads down and creating good quality food to get people to come back over and over again. So my number one inspiration is always them, and they always taught me two things, which is, number one, focus on your craft. And craft has, since then, has always been a very big thing for me. I think the fact that they are both in culinary arts has got me into what I am in design and arts, because they're kind of related in that sense of using your creativity to drive craft, to create something for the people out there. That's your way of, I always see that as my way of like performing and contributing to people and creating in the process. And that's a very big one from them. And then the second thing was craft and also teamwork, because both of them, they have been working together in the same stall for 35 years.
Wow.
So that's a big deal. Like, can you imagine working with your partner for like 35 years, like every single day? That's kind of cool, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's so interesting that you, you as a creative, as a graphics professional, you're working with some of the biggest brands in the world, and it's really interesting that you tie that form of design to creativity in the kitchen. I think it's the first time I've ever had someone on Tiger Heart Chats that's kind of made that connection. But you're right. Like, I mean, I love to cook. I find it so therapeutic. It's a really beautiful thing to do, after I've worked a long day, or if I just need to unwind. It's super fulfilling and super soothing for my mental health. And it's just so interesting that your family who work in that space, and you being surrounded with that has kind of led you into the design field.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like I only got so, introspective and start to learn about that when I connect all the dots, like now that I'm in my mid 30s, right? Just they have brought me up in the place of where quality is so important, and also like doing something that you enjoy doing, being passionate about something would drive to a success or a good thing that happened to you. So throughout my life, it has always been that way. And I find it is super fortunate to be in a family where they're so humble to start with. And this just like based on something, a great foundation, of
Yeah.
like creating with your own hands, like doing food, even as like, so what you're saying, like food is so therapeutic. Like for me in that case, it's like painting is so therapeutic. I do a lot of watercolor paintings too, and I think that's the idea of like creating with your hands, and design too, you're creating on the screen, but it's all about creation. And I always remember that there do things that always make people happy, like happiness of humankind to me
Mm.
is all about creation. Like if you are able to create as a person, people it can go into like it's spiritual as like procreation, like creating a person with another of like your spouse, or creating artwork, um creating plants, like making seeds that grow into plants. The idea of doing that is what gives people a lot of fulfillment, because I think that's what happiness drives, my happiness drives from as well, is the idea that I can do that on my full-time job, on my business, Rainygraphics, and I've just been keep doing that forever now.
So that's great that you touched on like your methodology and how it's really important for you to use this kind of form of creativity to help you have a better life. Where did the transition come from, you being in Singapore, being excited about the graphics world, and then going into the US? Like what led you into the US?
Right. Back in the day when I was, it's so funny. I have this dream about going to the US when I was 7 years old. Like, I remember very clearly, like, it was like my mom, my dad, me, my brother, my sister. So I'm coming from a family of five. I'm the youngest. And we are sitting at the dining table, and there was like news about New York, like Times Square. Whenever they show United States, it's always like Times Square, like Los Angeles, like San Francisco, Golden Bridge. It's always all these like stock images, right?
Mm.
And I was seeing that on Times Square, and for some reason, I just want to be doing things for the biggest screen to be seen on Times Square. And like I saw that tiny long vertical one that, where the ball drop every single year during New Year's. And I
Mm.
thought like, wow, if only I could have my work up there for everyone to see, I'll be so happy. So I was 7 years old. I like vividly remember telling that to my mom and dad. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go to New York one day. And then they were looking at me and they were like, no, you're not. Like we don't have that money, financial means to get you there. And it's like literally if you put a needle from Singapore to like across the globe, right? You will hit New York. Well,
Right.
technically like Australia to New York, but Singapore is like halfway across the world, like on the exact opposite side of the world. And it took like 18 hours flight. So if anyone hearing right now, 18 hours like the longest flight that you could do, like on one way in a one day. And yeah, it was the financial means, and it was just so foreign and so far away. And going from continent like Asia to a Western country, United States. So I have that dream at 7 years old and just start to like, didn't work about it every single day, but it's always at the back of my head.
Right.
And yeah, and then when I turned like 14, I started getting into anime drawing, illustration. My background is always like, watching all these animes growing up and wanting to create illustrations of them.
Yep.
And I joined a community of people that draw, and we hang out every day, every week at McDonald's actually to like draw stuff. And so I have friends of street artists, friends of people who do manga, people who are successful in the games industry. And they are all like the friends that I grew up with in my community in Singapore. So, and then fast forward when I was 21, 22, I was very fortunate to work towards a goal, and just so lucky that I got a scholarship from Singapore government, like a full ride scholarship to study overseas. And I thought, wow, this is like my chance,
Mm.
my only time that I could make it come true. And I got a scholarship and I managed to study in Savannah, but it came from, I guess I would say, like, I'm a huge believer of, I'm not trying to be like woohoo or all that stuff, but like manifestation.
Yep.
Just because it, like, you still have to work towards it, but the idea of thinking about it, having a goal, will make your actions like work towards that. And it's till now, it still runs true to me. If I think about something and I'm very goal focused and oriented, it's going to bring you somewhere.
I'm a strong believer of, manifestation as well. Things just don't land on your lap. You have to work hard. Obviously, there's an aspect of luck involved as well, but sometimes it's important to understand that you can make your own luck. So you have to kind of work towards it. You have to think towards it. You have to believe towards it for sure.
Exactly right. I feel like luck is created, like the fact that I say I'm so lucky, but that's also something that I work towards. And I think luck is like an opportunity that comes at you, and you like grab it and seize that and manage to make it work for you, and you call yourself lucky, right? So I think that's a big part of my life, really.
Absolutely. And so you came to the US, you studied here, you started to work with some agencies. How did you get to work with Spotify?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's actually a really, really good story because yeah, I worked on, say, like Stella Artois, BMW, Mercedes, Lexus, PepsiCo. It's all these companies that I worked with before Spotify. I was in a post-production company as an art director, and that was
Right.
my first job, out of college in the US. Like, even though I have years of experience before in Singapore, but it sort of like resets once you're in college, graduated from it.
Yeah.
And then I always feel like, it's funny because every single job I have was a referral, was a person that know me and mention me to someone else that works there. So including my post-production company before Spotify. And I was referred during my internship, and then referral to the company, and then referral again to Spotify. And they were looking for someone that has an ad. So it's like, okay, graphic design, but also motion graphics. So every single person has something like an extra thing that they do. So people are like, the baseline is graphic design. So you're good at designing, you're good at branding, packaging design, anything that's like static. And then I go in with like, okay, I know motion graphics too. So yeah, so that's how I got in. And my friend got in with like graphic design and illustration, and then graphic design and like tons of branding work under that person's belt. It's
Right.
just what are you specializing in? So I was say that it has been 8 years ago, has Spotify now till now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a long time. And Spotify brand and creative team business unit, I was the maybe like the 10th hire or something. And right now we have like 110 people in the company.
Right. Okay.
Been a long time coming.
So talk to us about like your as an art director at Spotify, talk to us about those production processes. Like what are you in charge of and what are you directing from an artistic perspective?
Yeah, for sure. So the day to day is creating a concept. It's like it starts from all the way from ideation of a concept, getting a creative brief. There's a strategy. It's always like a team involved before it gets to me. So like a strategist will be involved. A brand manager will be involved, and then they craft a way of angle of talking to our audience. And I come in as like early part in the stage, like doing ideation with creative directors, with me, with a producer, and then we talk about like what's the best design look or concept to go in. So I go from ideation, using like, so you're collecting a group of references. So I did mention that at the fireside chat in Infocom too, which is I think of my creative ideation as like a funnel, like a funnel that you start big and then you go like really tiny, right?
Right. Okay.
And that's how my workspace is too. Like my Illustrator and Photoshop workplace on screen is always like a ton of references. You can go up to say like 30 different references. I look at it at them at large and then zoom in on a kind of direction that I want to go for. And I was like sketching. So I'm pretty old school. Like I love like water color pencils and sketching on paper. So I write down the brainstorm, the main thing, and it branches out like a tree, and then you giving yourself keywords that's kind of helping my mind to picture that. And with the ideation references, keywords, I go straight to Illustrator to say like design the logo, a look and feel of it, just the initial part of it. And I think a lot of it comes from, when I take a break or, going to the shower or cooking, that break is so
Mm,
important. And
mm.
I value that a lot because that's when my initial ideas, right, goes to a bigger picture, a bigger place.
Wow.
Um, when I'm away from doing that. So I always need that break because that break is part of my creative process too. I think a lot of people underestimate that, oh, you have to work hard and like go all the way. But I think that having these breaks are actually my formula to create the best art direction that I come up with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's a very big part of what I do in my process. So it goes from ideation and that, and then creating some out of home billboards there just for mocking up and seeing how they look like on screen, say on Times Square. I have like a tiny vertical mock-up of Times Square that Spotify has on a media buy consistently every week. So we do have that billboard, for example, to work on. And like in Nashville, there's some billboards that we have already bought, and like in LA. So putting that and putting your image on it with copy and logo and say like an artist image or illustration that you do is gonna help picture everything, right? And that's how I go for. So it's always go digitally, digital banner, small scale, and then it goes into like mocking of out of home, mocking of like bigger scale things, and then on platform Spotify, what's the app outlook looks like of the playlist cover, for example. And yeah, it creates a cohesive picture, and then you get to see, okay, does it work or not? tally it together with the creative objectives of it, the KPIs, and see whether they, drive it and people are liking it or not. Yeah.
What is that feeling like? I mean, you talked about how when you were 7 years old, you saw some imagery from the States and you saw Times Square and you're like, I want to put my images there. Now you're doing that. What is that feeling like? How does that make you feel?
It's honestly like so it's hard to explain because I always say that because like, when I'm younger, I've looked up to how I am right now. Like young Rainy at 7 years old, she's gonna be like, wow. And an older Rainy at mid-30s is actually doing what she's doing. So part of it, I'm trying to make myself proud. Like I have been using that goal and now seeing it. But when I'm actually seeing it and physically it's there, it's not as like wowish as I would, because at the moment I was like, okay, I have other projects that I'm working on, right? It's always like at the moment that you feel exhilarating, but at the same time you're like,
Mhm.
okay, I did it. Okay, now what's next? So I go through this like a couple years ago. I went through like therapy too, and doing all sorts of things to sort of be more self-aware. And I feel like I realized that there's sometimes we have to stop and realize all the good things that I've created before. I feel like because of that, I'm always like in survival mode, because I come from Singapore to the US and you kind of have to like go, go, go. And because I need to prove myself in the brand new place, right?
Mm.
So and because of that, when I see my billboard, the first one that came out, which is for Pepsi, and I was like, wow, but at the same time was like, okay, what are projects I'm actually on right now? Like my mindset is like that. But now that I think back, I was like, wow, I actually did what I am set out for myself when I was 7 years old. And that was a big deal. And I should always, put myself and be my biggest supporter. And I always hear that too, which is there are tribes of people, right? But your number one tribe should be yourself.
Mm.
And then your second tribe would be people around you. And the third one is like the wider circle. But your biggest and the person that you should always love the most and be supportive of is yourself. And that strikes a chord too, because of that survival mode. I always like thinking about what people think about my work, right? Like as a designer, you're putting things out there. But
Mm.
at the same time, wow, like I did it. Now that I look back, I'm really proud of that too.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So you touched on a couple of things there that I want to kind of focus on for a second, if that's okay. The first thing is you're talking about like the fast-paced nature of the industry you work in. It sounds like there's some similarities, but what are the differences between the US work culture and the Singaporean work culture?
Right. That's very interesting, Sanj. Like there are a couple of things, but one of the biggest one is the way US and Asia perceive information. There's this really good book that struck me, which is called the culture, I think the culture ad or something. I'll put that link on later on. And
Yeah.
it talks about the difference between how we perceive information. And in the US, you can be more vague and fluid with saying like one line, and then you let the creative go for it, right? But in Asia, things are more top down, like is more hierarchical, and at the same time too, it's like you have to be more explicit with what the brief is. You have to be like, okay, create, say, a bottle with in in the desert. So you had to be like really specific, and then giving it to a creative there in Singapore to do it. And it wasn't as fluid as saying like, okay, in the US you will be like, okay, make a bottle in a hot and arid place, and then you try to put that space in as a designer, right? You come in and you add your creative ideas in there. So I think that's one of the big things, because I come in the US, in the beginning I was very, top down. I was like, okay, whatever the boss says, it's like, that's it, right? And there's no way of back and forth. And that was like before Spotify. That was like my first few experiences. And then I realized I wasn't getting or putting my input as a creative, which is what I'm being hired for. So that's a very big one. But also, like, Spotify is a Swedish company, so that is a little different from, say, like a US or American company.
Yeah.
And I do have a lot of liberty, like doing designs and being creative and being left to do things on my own and then coming back with the ideas. So and for that I appreciate it a lot. That's why I managed to stay for like 8 years here.
It's really interesting you touch that, because there are some people, not everyone, who were working in industry in one territory. And that may be fine for them, but I love the fact that I work with different businesses around the world, not just because you get to travel, but you also get to learn how humans in different territories work. And it sounds like you're in a really interesting situation there. As you say, you're based in the US, you're Singaporean, but you're working for a company that's Swedish. As one thing I know about Nordics, they're very different to Americans. Same with Asians as well. And there's a myriad of different types of perspectives in Asia, but particularly Asia is very different to the Western world. So it's interesting that you talked about that book, The Culture Ads, and how it kind of highlights the how you need to kind of change the way you communicate what it is you're trying to communicate through the ad in different territories, because those markets are very different. It sounds really simple on paper, but in reality, when you actually learn about those cultures, it's actually quite an exciting thing to learn about.
Yeah, it's exactly right, because there's so many nuances. And speaking, like, while you're saying that, I thought of I was doing a 2 months setting up of Spotify brand and creative in Singapore. So I get to understand, like, firsthand of working in Singapore after, in my mid-30s, and just being in it. And there was 6 different markets, even in Asia, and every single market has different nuances. They receive even advertising, how they perceive humor, how, definitely, like, I would say, like, the British humor is like the top notch for me. Like, it was just like subtle, but like it hits everyone here, right? Like, if you do a humor on television or on now we don't watch television anymore, more like Netflix. We perceive humor differently. And say, like, places like Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Singapore, like, we all perceive humor in a more, like, a direct way, if that makes sense. Like, you have to there's some places that are more about actions, like slapstick action humor. There are places there's more talking, like deadpan humor. So even just that is going to be different, say, in Germany or in US or in UK. And just based on that, I can see the wide array of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's a fun place to be. I mean, I've got clients all over the world, and I love going to visit them in their territories. Like there's a group of Germans that I work with, and the way we communicate is very different to the clients that I have in the US. Even in the US alone, there's a myriad of different perspectives that you have to kind of adhere to, but also enjoy as well, which is great. You touched on something else previously, and well, actually, over the last few points, and I kind of want to hone in on it because it's obviously something that's quite important to you. How do you manage your mental health? In this industry, because the ad industry in particular can be quite strenuous on people's mindsets. You touched on that you've done therapy and you like to take breaks, but specifically, how do you manage your mental health on a day to day?
Wow, that's a really good question. Um, a lot of it is, I think, really driving all the books that I read, right, has a little bit to do with mental health. I always feel like I have to educate myself on mental health, like controlling it, because I feel like this field, advertising, it can get really like false sense of, advertising is all about like creating things and making things look good, even the product that you don't really like or you like, for example. And that's gonna make you a little too numb with what's happening, like what's real and what's not. So I think that's just advertising at large, like the Mad Men era too, and I about 2 years ago I started going for therapy, because I was going through a breakup too, and then it makes me feel like, okay, if anything were to happen or what happened to me, it probably like 50% or 60% could have been my fault, right? And it's not just like a one person's fault thing. And I realized that by taking responsibility of my own mental health just helps me to be more in control of my mental health, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I was like, okay, there's something I need to work on. I need to learn how to be more self-aware, for example, to set boundaries, for example, at work, bringing it back home, getting all these emotions mixed up because I'm still in the work mode. It happens very often in advertising too, because now that all of us work remotely. So my space of, like, right now I'm chatting with you, Sanj, in my second bedroom, but once I step out here is the living room, and that's where my partner is in, and that's just a little bit of space for work, and then next moment you're like 3 seconds in, you're in a home space, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
And for me, it's so important to nowadays I just put down my work, you know maybe like look at my phone to like unwind it in my workspace before I head out to, say, the living room area. And that helps to create that separation. And one thing I'm still trying to learn is setting like boundaries of my own mind too, of what kind of emotions I'm like giving out to people, how would it be perceived. And it's funny too, because even though in advertising it's all about like creating certain emotions, right? Like in people, like evoking and getting people to be enticed to buy, say, your product, or like soft drink that you're trying to sell. But I being in therapy, then I start to realize how to fully articulate my feelings. Like I used to be like, okay, I'm feeling nervous. But like nervous is not exactly a feeling. Like I think there's in the beginning, my therapy gave me like a color wheel of feelings. I don't know whether you have that, but it's like a chart to say
Yeah.
like, hey, you're feeling sad, and it goes down to sad. Like you're feeling nervous because you're at work and like you're doing all that, and you're like being bounced around different projects, and that's why you're sad, for example, and that's
Mm.
why you are, like I need to even have a chart to show my feelings, to be able to explain my feelings. And that always cracks me up, because it's like a color wheel for designers like me, but it's for therapy and feelings. And it was like, wow, that's so profound, and it's so interesting to just put it in picture.
You're right about like your space as well, because when you're working in the creative environment, or any type of work environment, you need time to process what's just happened. Even if like what's just happened isn't a negative, you need time to kind of just turn off and think about and reflect what's happened. Otherwise, as you say, you're switching into your social life, and when you switch into that personal life, you're still the person that you were when you're in work mode, which is actually quite destructive.
Yeah, exactly. Especially, now that I'm trying to drive more of like rainy graphics too, being an entrepreneur and doing a full time is gonna crash into each other, and then going into your full time life. Yeah. And while working remotely, it's a lot.
You touched on sort of personal challenges that you're facing. Let's flip it and just talk about some of the positives. So, again, you're working with Spotify. You've been working with them for 8 years. Have you been to their offices out in Sweden?
Yes, I have been. Yep. And is it Stockholm? So,
Awesome.
Spotify Swedish, Stockholm office is the best.
So I've been to Stockholm and I love it. Tell us about your view on Stockholm and what you learned from your experience being there.
Right. Okay. So every single employee at Spotify, you get to be in Swedish Sweden, Stockholm Spotify office for say like a week, because they're trying to do like introduction days and understanding the brand, hearing about Spotify, how it came from say 50, I think it's 15 years ago or more now, and how it started back in the era of parroting music and stuff. And so it's like a super fascinating story, and we going there and hearing about that and how it came into a place where it's one of the giants in the world on like streaming music, right? But at the same time also like a great brand that's well known and recognized globally. So we have come a long way, I think 15 years. And I remember I was in Stockholm during the summer, and it was so beautiful. The place is so clean. People are nice. It's just like so fun to be walking around. There was a um Stockholm. There was like a shipwreck.
The
That like
Vasa Museum.
yeah,
I love
yes,
that. I love
yes,
that
that's
museum. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it was so cool to see like a full shipwreck in the museum, like inside a museum is mind blowing. And also the food is so different from say like the US or even Asia, definitely different from Asia. And I was just like being thrown with like different tastes and so curious about everything that's happening around me in when I was in Stockholm. So I really enjoy myself. And we have like they throw this great party where all the Spotifyers get to be there and sing karaoke
yeah.
and get engaged in like activities. And I remember at say like midnight at 12 minutes, it's always so cool to me that the sky is is like evening time, right? I don't know
Mm.
whether you have to Stockholm during summer or even just Scandinavia during summer. It's just nice to be out there at midnight. You can party all the way. And
Yeah, it's a
and it's still,
very unique part of the world. Like, if anyone listening who hasn't been to, any of the Scandinavian countries, should definitely visit it. It's just very, it's there's something about it. It's very kind of, as you say, quite clean and fresh, but it's also got like a kind of unique air about it.
it is, and even the office is great too. I think it was, if I'm not wrong, it has been close to 7 years now, but I think it was like a 15 story, mostly developers, but seeing the first part of how Spotify came about was is cool. It's
Mm.
just, yeah, part of great to be part of the community.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a part of like modern day cultural relevance and a sort of shift in human behavior. They've been at the forefront of it, from a music perspective. That's all like really good with regards to Spotify and stuff. Let's talk about Rainygraphics. This is kind of like a new venture now that's heating up, or is it something that's been around for a while? Like, tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm the founder of Rainygraphics, as everyone already know from now. Uh, it's kind of new-ish, but I have been working like towards this for a long time. Like just how I've envisioned, 7 years old, Rainy doing Times Square. So this has been like a long time just brewing on, and it's a team of us, like designers and motion graphics, I would say like branding specialists, and we work
Right.
closely with a social media business team and media buys for marketing and distribution purposes. But Rainy Graphics .co is doing mostly things like branding, logo, packaging design, digital banners, anything from the gamut of brand, like brand identity, creating like a tone of voice with design. So the last 8 years, I've been with Spotify for business unit for brand and creative, right? But it helps to create what give me time to really think also what kind of things that I would love to create an extension for Rainy Graphics, like almost like you're cooking, and you want to like also cook like different kind of recipes and food, right? Like, and I always see it that way. Like Rainy Graphics is an extension of how I can drive creativity out with more people there extended in the audience, and using like my skill set and experiences that I have for the last, yeah, I don't know, like 15 years of it. So we're doing really well now, and there are a couple projects that I'm working towards for Rainy Graphics, and very excited to be launching that soon, to out to the public. And it's just like so fun to be working with my people and just bouncing off ideas and stuff. And one big thing is, my team has a lot of people, they're much younger than I am, say like, mid 20s.
Yep.
And I'm always like amazed at how fast the ideas are. Like this idea of like, people consuming uh, fun things on TikToks, and it not Instagram or Facebook anymore, because like Facebook is so I guess it's like what my mom and my grandma would use. But TikTok has everything in there. And I have like, they always come up to me and it's like, hey, Rainy, have you seen this thing that's just blowing up on TikTok? And I was like, whoa, that's so cool. Like, that's it's just hearing like so fresh perspective too on how they perceive that, and also like wanting to help to create like a social cause for it. And they're just like much more conscious of, say, like advertising, that we have come a long way, right? Like from Mad Men to right now, and it's just so much more of a social cause than what we had before. So it's always fun to work with young people.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons why I teach. because it allows you to work with generally a younger audience, and it's really important to listen to that younger audience because it gives you a perspective on how things are changing quickly. There's a lot of old creatives I've met who have kind of become a bit jaded because they haven't really evolved with the rest of the world, and then they get to a point where they're kind of stuck in a corner. Working with young people is so important because as you say, it keeps everything fresh, it keeps you vibrant, and it allows you to listen to what's happening around you a lot more quickly.
Yes, exactly that.
We're coming towards the end of the podcast. There's still two more questions I want to ask you, just with regards to you. And it's a bit annoying because I feel like we could be talking for hours. And I remember when we were out in Infocom as well, we did talk for hours, and we should have recorded.
We did.
That. We should have recorded that for a podcast because there was some really interesting conversations there. Just with regards to you, and you've been in the industry for a long time now. What advice would you have given yourself, knowing now what you know with regards to the industry, if you were just starting in the industry again?
Wow, that's such a great question. And it's so hard to answer, Sanj.
Yeah.
I need to sit on that, but right off the bat, I think definitely be I would say like the young Rainy, right? Comes into this field as trying to prove herself, which when you are young, that's what you do, which is great, right? But also to be able to prove herself, but also believe that you can do that. So and like same as you, Sanj, like whenever I go back to Singapore, I will go to my alumni school and give a talk to the younger students, which are like 18, 18 and below, right? Like 16 to 18 years old.
Right.
And they always come up to me and they're like, yeah, Rainy, how do you do that? How do you get in? I don't think I can. I don't know where my goal is. I'm not like you. I don't have like a 7-year-old dream. But really, I think it was seeing someone that has really done it from your background, like wherever you're from. And people, they will love what you say because you are a perfect example of what they want themselves to be like. You're not just like a pipe dream that people think about. And I wish that Rainy, back when I was younger, has that confidence of saying like, okay, I'm good how I am. Like as a cultural coming from Asia, I'm good how I am, instead of like I want to change myself to be someone that I saw on TV that made it that way, like and it comes from all kinds, like being from Asia, Singaporean, a country that is so far away from United States. Even the accent that I come from, I was really not confident about my accent back in the day. I even go for speech classes, elocution, Toastmasters, just to bring that up. And I wish that Rainy knows, the young me knows that there's so much more I can contribute to it. And I always believe that is a culture add. It is a culture add that you're bringing to any place that you go, and take up the space that you are in that spot, instead of trying to be like everyone else. Be the person that's able to speak your truth of where you're from, what you do before, what your struggles are, what your wins are. It's different, but people accept and like that difference. And that's what I wish that I know earlier, that people like it. And you're just going to make the conversation more interesting and colorful, rather than saying whatever everyone else is talking about and then you try to do everything else. So that's a very big part I learned about myself right now.
No, absolutely. And it's really important for particularly young people who are like apprehensive about their identity in these new environments. They really need to be, they shouldn't let the lack of diversity or the lack of similarity to them intimidate them. Because as you say, what they bring to the table is where the value is. So that's really beautiful. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I want to leave with something too, Sanj,
Yeah,
which is, my soul is from Singapore, my features are from Asia, but the passion is from United States. Like I craft it that way, and um, and it just make a person so much more colorful when you have just from different places in the world.
absolutely. I mean that's a good way to end this wonderful podcast that this wonderful conversation that we're having right now. We've come to the end of this podcast, which is a real shame. I'm sure there's going to be people that want to contact you after listening to this. What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, for sure. So you can email me at graphicsrainy@gmail.com, or you can find me at rainygraphics.co. So it's RAINY, like the weather, rainy, and then graphics, GRAPHICS .co. So you can always send me an inquiry over there, and I will try to help you out and respond to every single person that has reached out to me.
Amazing. No, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Sanj. It was such a great conversation.
Awesome. Awesome. Those of you listening, again, thank you so much for downloading these episodes. We're getting some really good numbers on the downloads for this podcast. So I'm really happy that we've got a community and that you guys are really kind of engaging with the discussions that we're having. Just make sure, if you're sharing or whatever, make sure you use the hashtag Tiger Heart Chats, all one word. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, please be good.